Now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, that was my bad, man. I didn't have my mixer turned on.
That's all right. I was freaking out because I'm nearly a Luddite, and so I didn't really know if I was doing something right. I think this is my second Zoom call. We've done a few things on Google, some or other, whatever.
Hangouts, probably. Google
Yeah,
Hangouts.
yeah. We've done that for some about meetings, but I've only been on one other Zoom call. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, hey, Johnny, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
Yeah.
You're actually someone that I've had a couple of people that listen to my podcast request that you come on. So
really?
Yeah. Meredith.
Yeah.
Meredith, she was like, hey, you should do one with him. She listens to the podcast a lot. And I was like, great idea. But somebody else, maybe Josh McMillan, said that you would be a good guest. Right.
Okay. Well, I've done a few different podcasts. Most of them have been geared toward conservation and environmental issues. I think I did one for Arkansas Tech University after I spoke there. But I think, all the rest of them have been outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
So this would be a first general conversation, I guess.
Hey, well, I definitely do want to focus on, stuff that you're into. Another mutual acquaintance of ours, Billy Reeder, he said that he would describe you as someone who could basically explain our relationship, human beings, with the natural world in every conceivable way. So pretty interesting.
High bar.
Yeah. All right. So that sets the bar for our conversation. But yeah, he said something like that was it was pretty deep, which I guess Billy does some writing for your magazine, right?
Yeah, he's done some in the past. Yep. He hasn't done any in a while, but I think he's reaching out to some bigger venues now. But yeah, I've known Billy, Lordy, a long time. I don't know, probably about a decade, more than a decade, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast a couple of times, and man, I just really like that guy. He's trained with martial arts with me, been to the gym, so great dude. I love talking to him. But man, one thing I kind of interested in about you, Johnny, is just like looking at your website, looking at your blog, looking at your magazine, like just different things that you're involved in. It seems like you have really taken all of your interests, which would, conservation, hunting, no matter what they are, you've really packaged them nicely into something that you, I guess, make a living with. Is that correct?
Yeah, a meager living, but I make a living. That's actually was the reason that I chose to go into journalism and writing. And I don't know how much you know about my backstory, but I went back to college at age 40.
Wow.
I'd actually started back. I graduated from high school in '89 and started in college course the following semester, and was pursuing a degree in biology, and dropped out for all kinds of silly reasons, and then did all kinds of other things. I've owned a convenience store, rental property, been in insurance sales, owned a hog farm. I've done a lot. And how can I put this? And when 2008, when the recession happened, I was given an opportunity to reset my life. And writing is something I always wanted to do, but I didn't think I could do it. I thought it was something you had to be born with, had to have this magical skill you were just endowed with from birth. But I went back to college to finish my degree in biology, and at the same time, I thought, I'm gonna write a few things just to see if I can do this. And so I wrote an essay and sent it off to an editor I knew, and I just asked him in the email. I said, "Man, can I do this? I mean, is this something you think I can sell this stuff?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'll buy this one from you." And so then it took off, and after my first semester back at Tech, I decided to change my major to journalism. And a long way around the barn, the main reason is journalism and writing gives me an opportunity to explore and learn about anything I want to learn about in greater depth. And, along the way, you get paid a little bit. That's my job, is basically to learn. So I enjoy that. And that's how I've tried to set up my life. Trying to find a way. David, I don't know if you're familiar with David Quammen. He's a great writer. He's written one of my favorite books, Monsters of God. But he has a quote that goes something like, he said, "Don't try to figure out a way to make a lot of money. Just try to find a way to learn and have all these great experiences, and try to figure out a way to turn that into a way to make a meager income." And
Yes.
that's kind of been my guiding light. And so I've been able to do that. I've been very, very fortunate. About is a cornerstone of that. About the River Valley Magazine here in Russellville, that was one of the first places I sold some writing to, when the founder and editor then, Diane Edwards, was there. She passed away in 2013, but she bought some of my stuff and was kind of a mentor to me. And so, again, with that cornerstone is income and steady place to do work, I've been able to branch out and do other stuff.
Yeah, and man, you've got what seems to be, like I just said, like a real diverse background and approach. And I like how creatively you've packaged all your stuff. Like, I have a lot of interest myself, and they're kind of interrelated, but also it's like, well, how do I get all this out there without only talking about martial arts, or only talking about history, or only talking about the movies I like, or whatever it is? You got to package it. But what were you doing with biology? Like, I mean, that makes sense that you would be interested. Were you doing like wildlife and fisheries, or what?
Yeah, wildlife and fisheries. And that was the first, that was what I wanted to do at first. I think I was probably veering off into more of a general. I didn't really have a plan. When I went back to school, it was because I thought I needed to go back to school. I didn't have a solid plan for what I wanted to do afterward. I was mainly going back for the education. I need to learn stuff. And it was kind of a tumultuous time in my life. And also I was 40 years old, so I was getting close to that midlife crisis thing and reevaluating some things and some choices I'd made and the motives behind the choices I'd made. And again, going back to school, when I originally started, I was all about, I can nerd out on some biology stuff. But when I started back at 40, it was more like I'm not really sure what I need to do, but I know I need to be back in school right now. And the best thing I could come up with was continue my education in biology. But again, that was very short-lived. I had one semester, I think, and I'd taken a journalism class and I sold a few pieces of writing to some other places. And I thought, no, this is what I need to do. But the biology, I do have a minor in biology, and that has actually informed a lot of what I write about. It makes it easier. I think when I'm, one of the last bigger pieces I wrote was for Arkansas Life about bobwhite quail and how they're doing habitat restoration to bring population back up. And so when I'm talking to biologists, and of course, I'm not a biologist. I don't have that level of knowledge, but they can throw stuff out at me and I can absorb it. I can, and if I don't, totally understand the concept, don't have to go very far to find it. So the biology, actually going into biology was almost the same as going into writing. When I was going to finish my degree, it was an excuse to learn about a lot of different stuff. I just didn't know which direction it was going to take.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind that. Like we have a similar story, by the way. I'm only 33, right? But I graduated, went to college, made the dean's list my first semester, dropped out my second semester, didn't know what I wanted to do, was not confident, bounced around some different jobs, started selling cars. Then the recession hit. Then I go on unemployment for 17 months. But I teach college now. I tell my students all the time, like, hey, I've dropped out 3 times, and now I'm up here giving you this test. What do you guys think about that? And they're like, oh, man. But, I was able to leverage that recession in a very similar way to come back. And at the time, I was like doing martial arts. I mean, you're probably familiar with what Corey and I do here at the gym a little bit. But I was like, man, I should do an MBA, right? I should get, I should do this. Maybe I should go a double degree in business. I had a serious interest in becoming a history teacher, secondary ed. and ended up getting my master's in history. Long story short, but very similar. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was like, well, I own a business, so don't I need to get a business degree? But that was not really sound logic. I did take a couple of business classes, but and they helped me. But man, honestly, like what you were talking about, getting in that learning mode daily, going back to school taught me to be a learner, you know, and I've leveraged that. I feel like I've learned so much more since I got my master's degree, since I've been out here doing it than before. Man, you mentioned like selling some of your pieces and stuff, even when you were just switching over to journalism. Like, how do you do that as an author? Like, I've talked with the Arkansas Encyclopedia and different historical societies. I kind of know that process, but like, how's that work for other publications?
You have to be tenacious. You have to be determined that this is what you want to do. I'll tell you a neat little story. When I first got started into this, and of course, like, again, I was 40 years old, so I already had I was born with the gift of gab. I don't have very many gifts, but I can talk to anybody. That's why I was good at sales. I can talk to anybody, and it doesn't matter who it is, what station they are in life, you know, socioeconomic scale, wherever. I can talk to you, meet you as a person there, and so I used that strength. That was the only skill I had at the time. And I reached out to people. I would just email them or call them, writers I knew, a couple of them in Arkansas. One of them in particular, this was really interesting. He kind of responded to my email he was a jerk. And I was kind of doing this in the email. I'm not worthy. I'm just looking for a little advice. And he was kind of a jerk about it. But I knew that he had connections, and I knew that he had some knowledge I needed to get. So this sounds very Machiavellian, but I knew where he was going to be at a certain event, and I arranged to be there. And I basically walked up to him and said, "Hey, I'm Johnny Sain. I talked to you over email, and you were a little rude to me, but you got some information I need to know." And not necessarily like that. But anyway, he was at first taken aback that I had the cojones to, come up and do that. And then he talked to me, and we're friends. And he introduced me to his wife, who was the president of a writers association, who was a gateway to all these editors and all these publications. And that was the key. I just put myself out there. Even when I was really, really ignorant about how to do it, and really my skills as a writer were, I'm a much better writer now than I was then. But I put myself out there. I made connections. I asked for guidance. I asked for help. And then I started sending query letters and submissions to magazines, and got turned down a lot. That's the key. There's another, I don't know if it's a quote, but it's something I've turned around in my head, that, becoming a writer is really deciding that you want to be a writer and doing it. There's no great mystery behind it. It's just like every other craft. You got to put in the time. You can't go out, doing all these fantastic riffs with words and stuff. You got to learn the basics first. And then you got to make connections. You got to find people that can help you further your career, which is probably the most important thing. On top of, once you make these connections and you get these assignments, you got to deliver the product. You got to deliver a good product. But that's the key. There's really no secret. It's hard work. It's still hard work. It never gets easier. And I'm not even talking about the actual writing process. I'm just talking about, the marketing, or the business side of it, getting yourself out there and selling. I think a lot of journalism students, a lot of want to be writers, that's probably where they're most lacking. They think that it's just going to magically happen. And I was delusional like that for a while, but you have to be the one to make it happen. Like I said, and then deliver. When you get the opportunity, you bring it. That's it. And I've had a lot of journalism students, a lot of other writers talk to me, ask me about it. There's no secret. It's just work.
Dude, that is the number one thing I tell people. I get this comment a lot, right? I got somebody who just was messaging me yesterday, a former student of mine here at the gym, right? And they're like, dude, how do you do it? I was like, well, I get up at 4. And they're like, well, how do you do that? I was like, well, this process, like, don't think I'm doing a lot at 4. It takes me from 4 to 5 just to get my life together. Like, oh man, it's this coffee. But I get that comment a lot, like, hey, how are you doing all this stuff? And it's just like, well, I'm on the long game.
Yeah.
I'm playing long-term games. Like at some point I made a shift to start being like, oh, I'm just going to do as much I can every day towards these goals and reset, reevaluate. Like, what am I doing to achieve these goals? Am I acting accordingly? But that's a real interesting approach. Are there any classes you took when you were going to college that you feel like were the most beneficial? 2 classes I always wanted to take, and I had a big interest. I took Dr. Ritchie was a writing professor there that I really enjoyed when I went, right? He taught creative writing. I never got to take him for it. And I also never took technical writing, but those are 2 classes I always wanted to take. Are there classes you took that were beneficial? Did you take those?
I did have a class with Dr. Ritchie. It was beneficial, but I'm telling you, the 2 most beneficial classes I had at Arkansas Tech University were philosophy and anthropology.
Tell me about that Dr. Bush class you took.
I didn't take Dr. Bush.
Oh, wow.
I forgot.
Mitchell.
I forgot who I had. The anthropology, I had Dr. Bound.
Okay, yeah. He has a great
Eric
beard.
Bound. Yeah. I had him, and we actually became friends. Actually, first day of class, and we're about the same age. I was sitting, and the person sitting next to me, I said, I'd like to have a beer with that dude. And not much longer than we did have beers, and we became friends. But yeah, those were the 2 that were probably most important to me, because I'm of the opinion you go to college to learn how to think critically. It's not a trade school. You go there to learn how to think. And those 2 classes taught me how to think more than any other classes I had. And the writing, is a product of that. As far as the technical stuff on writing, man, most professors are going to kill me, but I think you can get most of that. I don't know if you have to go to class to get that. You can learn that on your own, but learning the theories behind the reason we are the way we are, the reason we think the way we think, the reason we act the way we act, all of those are integral to being a good writer. If you don't have, and you don't necessarily have to write about that, but if you don't have that baseline understanding of, for lack of a better way of saying it, the human condition, then I don't see how you can write about anything, because you can't see other perspectives, and that's a requirement for being a writer. You have to be able to see other perspectives. You have to be able to understand to the best that you can other perspectives, even though you may not agree with, certain conclusions drawn from those perspectives. And that's what those 2 classes taught me. They also taught me the philosophy class, and it taught me how to see bullcrap, which is, again, very important for being a writer. My senses on that are pretty strong. I can read through, when somebody's feeding me a line, not necessarily that they're trying to lie, but the logical missteps they're taking in arriving at a conclusion.
Did you ever take logic, the class?
I did not, and I wish I would have. Yeah, because and it's also, and I'm not just saying to use it as like something when you're dealing with other people. It's also very the most beneficial for introspective use. To check yourself. How am I coming at this situation or this story or even this person? Am I looking at this with a clear lens, or is it filtered, through some other things that I'm not aware of? That's what those classes taught me. If you want to be a good writer, technically, you need to read a lot. You need to read a lot of good writers. If you want to go into newspaper stuff, of course, you learn AP style, proper grammar and all that stuff. But actually, good writing is not all of that. good writing is that understanding of the human condition and the ability to write about it in a very honest way. And I don't know that you can get that. Again, no disrespect to any of the journalism or writing instructors at Tech, and I think they would probably tell you something similar. You get that. You have to have that. The technical stuff you can get other ways.
Yeah, well, man, that's interesting that you say all this, because I mean, just looking around at your stuff, browsing around your site, reading a couple of your stories, hearing what Billy said about you, I was like, man, this guy's an empiricist, right? I was like, he's into looking at things and thinking about them, which is, and two of the, yeah, hey, I have that experience. That's where it came from. I went out and I gained that experience. I had empirical data. I saw that and I derived this from. That's a real interesting approach, man. I talk about empiricism with my students at the university all the time. Then I have to explain to them, here's what empiricism is. Because I'll say empirical belief, and they're like colonialism. I'm like, no, not really. But yeah, that's a very interesting approach, and one that's age old. You know.
Yeah.
I actually have a minor in philosophy.
Method. It's kind of the scientific method boiled down. I mean,
natural, like what we call in history, natural philosophy, right? Yeah. Like, or just like the natural, just study of the natural world. Very scientific revolution. Yeah. Well, yeah, man, that's awesome. Okay, so you talked about when you started writing for About. Do you operate that publication now?
I do not. It's owned by Chris Zimmerman, who's our publisher, and he did layout and design of the magazine when Diane Edwards was the editor and the owner. When Diane passed away, I was actually still in college. That was 2013, so I was a sophomore, and I took over the editor job. I'm prepared, but I was the best option, I think, at the time. Diane, again, had worked with me, quite a bit, had mentored me, and I'd actually taken on some other responsibilities to the magazine when she first fell ill. But when she passed away, I became editor, but Chris bought the magazine, and I am, on paper, I'm contract. Of course, it's deeper than that. I have an emotional investment in the magazine. It's a magazine about my place, my home. Besides all the the professional stuff tethered to it, how Diane helped me along and gave me opportunities. I've never lived more than 30 minutes from where I was born, which was in Dardanelle, Arkansas. And I grew up in Adkins, lived in Dover for 20 years. I live in outside of Dardanelle now. I've got ties to Newton County, which is a little out of our range, but anyway, this is my home. I don't even really say that I'm from a town anymore. I'm just from the River Valley in Southern Ozarks. And so, no, I'm not, tied to the magazine in any way on paper, but I am, I think, tied to the magazine, to get really poetic, in some spiritual sense. Again, we tell stories about people from my place. And so, long answer to your question, no, I don't own it, but I'm a big part of it.
Being editor.
We have a three-headed. Well, it's really, there three people that run it are Chris Zimmerman, of course, publisher and owner, and then I'm the managing editor, and then Liz Chrisman is our photography editor, and we're the faces that are behind the main thrust of About.
Yeah. Okay. What, like, as editor with what you do, I mean, like, what you have to, I'm sure that's a time-consuming job, right? Like, you have to, what goes into that?
It's not nearly as glamorous as most people think it is.
Editing video, I know, is a major time suck, right? Like, even for this little podcast.
Yeah, the administrative stuff is, and I don't like it, but it's necessary. If I had it my way, I would write, I would edit, come up with creative ideas or not creative ideas necessarily, but weigh in on, design layout or ideas for photography and all that, but a lot, like yesterday, most of my day, all of my day was administrative stuff. You got to track down, the subjects you want to write about, make sure they're open to an interview, to a story, and then you assign writers, make sure that Liz and the writer are on the same page and on the same schedule. Right now we're gearing up for a big issue in September, the Russellville Sesquicentennial issue. And it's going to be probably it will be the biggest issue we've ever done. And so I'm having to fill a lot of pages and reach out to a lot of people to get that lined out. That is actually most of what I do for About. Written content, I write the editorial, of course, and I write our Valley Vittles food column. And then I occasionally write a feature story, and then editing. I've not ever put, Chris Zimmerman has asked me a couple times to try to figure out how much time I put into it. You can't quantify that. There's rarely a day, there is never a day that I don't do something that has something to do with About. Some days it takes up a lot of my time, but then that goes all the way until I get ready to go to bed. I'm always thinking about stuff. I can't just turn it off.
Yeah, I suffer from that same disease, man.
Yeah, it's one of my life and my work, my personal life and my professional life are really closely intertwined, and that's both good and bad. And in some aspects, it's really good because I don't know. It feels like that's the way it should be, and to a degree. But on the other side, I never get a break. People assume I work from home. I've worked from home the entire time I've edited About, and of course I freelance for other publications. And people assume you work at home. You're your own boss. You do what you want. Blah blah blah. Well, I'm like you. I'm usually up at 4:30 or 5. I don't even need an alarm clock. My brain's going, and it never stops. And again, I'm not complaining. I've built this life, and I'm of all the other options out there, this is the one I like the best.
The real question is, how do you get your wife to understand? I'm joking. Like, Cora's super supportive, but man, it is like I'm about to go on vacation. Yeah. Tomorrow we have our 10-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's also Cora's birthday. So I'm like, okay, I really need to not take any work with me. So like, man, I've been doing all this extra, but it's going to be extremely hard for me to turn it off when I get there, even though like, man, it's going to be relaxation city. It's going to be a great time. We're looking forward to it, but man, it is so hard. Like, that's why I joked about being a disease to like, when you had that like creative mindset, it's just like, man, I can't stop thinking about ancient Egypt or arm bars or whatever it is I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that fire keeps going. Christine is, we've been married 26 years.
Wow.
Right.
I
can't remember now. It was 26, 27. 27. Yeah, it's 27. Anyway, but we've kind of, well, for the most of our married life, we've both been self-employed. And so that kind of goes along with it. And it's just understood, our vacations are mostly short, and, we both know that they're not going to be without some peek at the emails or some, correspondence with someone on the other end. That's just a given. And again, it's not, in some ways, there are some days, I want to just unplug everything and say, man, I don't want to talk to nobody or anything that has to do with anything on my job end for like a week. But even when we're off grid barely for a couple days, we go camping or something like that. Usually the second day, I'm kind of like, man, I kind of want to know what's going on here, or I'm itching to do this, or so. Again, it's good and bad. Sometimes I hate it. Sometimes I love it. I guess you can say that about a lot of stuff. Christine's very understanding on it. when I had this crazy idea to do this and go back to school, she was 100% behind me.
Did she go back to school as well?
Yeah, she went back to school after I got started. I guess it's right after yeah, we went simultaneously for a while. I think for maybe 1 year, maybe 2. Yeah, I was going back and, kind of had an idea of which direction I was going, and she didn't know. And we were talking about it, and I said, you just need to go back to school. Actually, she had never gone before. This was her. She just started fresh and jumped into it, and she was 42 or 43.
Wow.
Graduated with honors. Got a degree in sociology. Man, she's got 2 or 3 degrees. Sociology.
I've loved her comment. She shared this a little. I'm friends with her on Facebook. She comes in.
Oh, okay.
But I've loved hearing her share about going back, and I think that it's important to get that dialogue out because, man, some people like myself, I just was not ready to go the first time around. When I did become ready, it was a massively beneficial process for me.
Yeah.
And like, what I'd like about what she said is like what it did for me. Like, it raised my empathy level. I became way more open-minded and viewing more groups of people more empathetically. I mean, it was a great thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's kind of like, different posts I've made commented on that and talked about things that she had been exposed to. But I always love hearing those stories when people, I have a lot of students that are over 40 at the community college. Like, we have such a diverse, it's a lot of parents. I even have a lot of high school students, man. Like, last December, we had 7 high school students get an associate's degree.
Wow.
Like, I couldn't even get into college algebra when I was in high school, Oh,
no,
man.
Yeah, the college experience, I was exactly like you. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I got out of high school. And I mainly went because that's what my parents wanted me to, I'd earned a scholarship, and I felt obligated to go to school. But I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't care. But going back at age 40, of course, with all that, life experience behind me, actually college made, even with all that life experience behind me, college made my world bigger. Mm-hmm. My scope just got way wider. And that's, kind of going back to what I mentioned before, that's what I believe college is supposed to do. It's not supposed to teach you how to be a this or that. Of course, you need to pick up some basic skills maybe in this particular profession, but that's not really what it's designed to do. It's designed to make you think. That's what it did. And I would not trade that. Part of me wishes I'd done it sooner, of course. Everybody probably thinks that, but at the same time, it happened when it needed to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a great experience. It was a great experience for Christine. I believe so. I won't speak for her, but anytime we talk about it, she said that was one of the best decisions she's ever made.
Yeah, well, like I said, just picking up with her comments on social media, like I would just say that's true because I was thinking about it when you were talking about it. That's and it's even awesome that both of you guys have that story, right? I feel like I see people like, well, I'm married, I can't go to school, or I get married and I have kids, or I have kids, or it's like, man, I have so many parents that are students and see so many people just doing it, making it happen. It is possible.
Yeah, it's like any, there are some, I understand that not everyone comes from a place that I came from and has opportunities that I have. But for the most part, I think if you want to do something, you just need to decide in your head you want to do it. That's kind of how I've lived my life. And I know I haven't made the best decision all the time, but Christine and I were talking about, we were going down memory lane talking about stuff. And when I owned the hog farm, I was 27. I was 27. I had zero money. I don't know how we even got a loan, but I decided I wanted to farm, and I figured out a way to do it. And again, I'm privileged in lots of ways, and I understand that. But I think that a lot of I don't want to get into the whole life coach thing, but I think a lot of what holds people back is they don't make up their mind that they want to do something, set a goal, and then just go do it. And yes, you may fail. I failed a lot. I think anyone that's done anything has failed a lot. But you're never going to reach something that you want. You're never going to reach whatever that may be, unless you decide to act on it. Lots of times my problem now is biting off more than I can chew. But I think that's, again, part of it. You extend yourself, push yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, one thing I wanted to chat with you about is I was browsing around your blogs and just some writings you'd done on your website. And there's one that I remember reading that I'd seen shared a few times. And I think it kind of ties into a lot of things that you're interested in. But it's a story you wrote about this area basically where people bow hunt for gar a lot, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Man, but that's such an interesting take you took on it, right? Because like conservation efforts, hunting, feeding your family with food, like I'm all about that, right? And I grew up hunting with my dad. I don't really hunt so much anymore personally, but I'm not against it either, right? So, but man, you just made some really good points about like, okay, this is not that, right? What these people are doing with this, or like how, like I remember growing up going fishing, we'd catch gars, and they would, like, people that we'd be with, even my dad would like break their top bill off and throw.
My dad did that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So for people that haven't read that, would you kind of tell them what we're talking about if they're listening?
Well, where to start? If you're familiar with bow fishing, and it doesn't have to be necessarily bow fishing. There are certain animals, wild animals specifically, that have been labeled, or there have been certain labels placed on wild animals based on their benefit to people. Gar are labeled a very negative sounding rough fish for most people. And there's a whole lot of other fish in that category.
Carp.
And carp. Carp are kind of a different story because they're invasives too. But buffalo, gar, grinnell, bowfin, we call them grinnell. I don't know. There's a whole lot of them. But basically, they were given that label because they're not beneficial in some way. They're not highly sought after to eat. They don't have any commercial value. They don't have any utilitarian value. And the attitude toward those animals, another one would be, if you want to talk about terrestrial animals, coyotes. Coyotes are another one.
Yeah.
Lots of other predators. If they don't have utilitarian value, then they're given these labels as vermin, or it's a rough fish, or pests, or whatever. And when you express when you label these animals like that, basically what you're doing is you're trying not to sound too harsh here, but you don't have an understanding of how ecosystems work. It's really a dominionistic mindset that causes people to label animals like this. If you can't extract any value out of them, they don't have any worth. Gar, they have long been despised. Like you said, your dad did, mine did too. We catch them when we were catfishing, and Dad killed them. And it was actually the Arkansas Game Fish Commission. They used to promote that. There was a belief, I don't know how they arrived at it, that gar decimated game fish populations. They ate bass and crappie and brim and all this other stuff. Come to find out, that's really not true. They don't have much to do with those populations at all. But what it led to was large scale killing gar indiscriminately. And out of that kind of came the attitude that we could treat all rough fish like this. And bow fishermen, people that shoot fish with bows, they target those rough fish. They're allowed to by the Arkansas Game Fish Commission. And not all of them, but the majority. And when I did it, we'd shoot fish. We just throw them on the bank, or take them home and throw them in the garden. Which was a huge waste of a resource, and also just incredibly disrespectful. disrespectful not only to the individual fish, but also to this big system that the fish is part of. And what I came to realize, slowly, growing up in this culture that usually views animals in a very utilitarian way, how can I use them? They don't really have benefit unless I can use them. Was that the gar has an intrinsic value. It has value that I don't understand. It also has value that I can't understand if I'm willing to learn about the ecology and the biology of the fish. The guy that kind of led me down that road to that, it was a writer named Aldo Leopold. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Yeah. Billy Reader told me to ask you about him. Ironically,
Aldo Leopold.
Yeah,
he's the reason I grow a beard in the winter. But
hey, Johnny, hold on 2 seconds. I got somebody actually knocking on my door. I don't know if they're.
Okay.
I'm at my gym. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I'm in my new studio, and I don't have my door tinted yet, so I bet they're asking about the gym. I'll be right back.
Don't worry.
Sorry, man. I've got I have my own entrance and exit. It's the only door in and out of here. But my tent guy, I haven't got with him I need it blacked out so people can't even see me in here. But sorry about that. Aldo Leopold.
Aldo Leopold. He wrote a book called the Sain County Almanac, and Aldo Leopold is the father of modern wildlife management. And he was a scientist, and he was also just a hell of a writer, incredible writer, who somehow made that distinction between it's hard to talk about this without going into all these different angles, but he made that distinction between scientific knowledge and something that is more, again, spiritual is the best way I can say it. He made that distinction really hazy in a lot of his writings. It was hard to tell where one ended and one began. And the basis of all of that was his thoughts it's called the land ethic. And what the land ethic is that it says that we need to treat the land ecosystems as a community, and to understand that each piece is interdependent on another piece. And even if you don't know exactly how that dynamic works, there are these connections, and these connections have been power and life on this planet for how long's life been on this planet? How many billions of years? That's what's been powering this life. And so when you go to tinkering with stuff, because again, you put labels on it of this has value and this does not, or you alter the landscape in various ways, not just physically out there moving land or changing waterways, but taking creatures out of it. That you're altering these ecosystems, and sometimes in irreparable ways, or ways that I won't say irreparable, because evolution, the niches are always filled, but it changes it for us. Ultimately, it changes us for us humans and our experience with it. And so a lot of that thinking, was what drove that gar essay. There was one scene in particular Leopold talked about. He used to be about killing wolves. He thought wolves should die because more wolves meant more deer. But then he understood that, or less wolves meant more deer. But then he learned that more deer means that they browse down the vegetation on the mountain. And when they browse down the vegetation on the mountain, that disrupts birds, migrating birds that nest there, that disrupts insect populations. It can have a whole cascade of other environmental issues because there are too many deer. And when he realized that after he wrote about it, he killed a wolf, and he walked up to it and he said, it's again, not verbatim, but he talked about how the green fire in its eyes was dying. And he realized that the only person or the only entity that could decide whether a wolf should die or not is the mountain. And that was the same thoughts I had actually about the gar when I started thinking about it. You know, these gar play really integral roles in these ecosystems. They do control some fish. Usually it's bait fish like shad and stuff like that. And they're ancient. Gar evolved with dinosaurs. They haven't changed much. They're basically the same creature they were when T-Rexes were walking. Seems pretty haughty and arrogant of me to assume, you know, just for my amusement, that it's okay to go out and stick an arrow in one of these things that may be 30 years old and then just throw it in the garden. So, and again, I arrived at a lot of this, you know, through reading stuff like Leopold and Edward Abbey and Paul Shepard and David Peterson, a bunch of these outdoor, you know, they weren't just hunters and anglers, they were thinkers. That's really what's powered the gar story and several others I've written.
Yeah, fascinating. I'll share that when I post this podcast.
Okay.
I'll share the link, that way people can go read it. Because man, it was great, and it's something I'd thought about a couple of times. I'd seen it shared a couple of times, and honestly, I didn't even remember it was your article until I was on your site browsing around when you sent me your website, right? And I was like, all right, great. That'll give us something to talk about, because that was a great writing.
Yeah, it made the rounds, and that was an article that I wrote, and it actually I think I sat on it for 2 years.
Wow.
Before I published it, because I sent it off. It was it still may be, I think, I usually hate everything I write, but I like that one. And I'd send it off to some mentors of mine, writers that I really respect, when I wrote it, and asked them their opinions, and they all loved it. And one of them told me, he said, you need to sit on it for a little bit and make sure, you know, it's still good a few months from now. And so that's what I did. And a few months turned into 2 years, and I finally revisited it, and I said, yeah, it's ready now. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. But yeah, that's, if I were going to boil down my thoughts on everything, I think you could find it in that article.
Yeah. Man, how do you overcome what you just said? Like I've experienced that a little bit with like putting out videos, this and that. I've got like 800 videos on YouTube, you know, so between my podcast and the gym. But I remember when I was, you know, getting ready to start putting myself out there, I don't really think about it as much anymore, but because I just frequently do it, right? But I did, it's like, okay, is this video crap? Like, am I putting out a crap video right now? Inevitably, sometimes I did. But like you were saying, like, oh man, I don't really like my stuff. Like, why would you say that, and how do you overcome it? Like, is it like you don't like? My thing is like, all right, people are gonna talk shit in the comments. You know?
Yeah, I haven't overcome it. It's imposter syndrome, and I don't feel like I feel like the next thing I write, people are gonna say, "Aha, we knew he was an idiot. He's been an idiot all along, and this is proof he's an idiot." And he doesn't know what he's talking about. He shouldn't be a writer. You know, I've been fooling everybody. And it's pretty common. Actually, every writer that I know personally that I really respect, some writers that I think of as like, I'm thinking of two right now that are, man, top of the game. And they deal with it constantly. One of them actually told me that means you're doing things right. You've always got to check on yourself. So it's not so much overcoming it as it is kind of powering through it. The obstacle, the obstacle becomes the way, kind of a thing. And so, you know, you just got to keep pumping it out there. And, you know, some stuff you do is going to be bad. I think you have to realize that. Mine, I'm pretty obsessive, probably a little neurotic. And so my stuff, I'm just extremely critical of my own work. And again, though, it's not just me. Other writers I talk to, photographers, artists, they feel the same way. So getting over it, I don't think there's a way to do that.
Maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think you learn to deal with it. It's like so many other, issues I've got. My personality and emotional stuff, man, I learned to deal with it. I try to find ways to channel these, what could be deficiencies in some sense into working for me. And I think I've done that. But yeah, most of the time I can't read anything I've written. Once I write it and it's published, I don't want to read it again. There are a handful, the Gar Hole and maybe a couple, 2 or 3 others that I keep in a folder that when I need to pump myself up and say, I got a project and they're like, man, you can do this. Cause sometimes you're worried, man, is that well going to go dry? I mean, am I going to be able to find these words? And so I'll go back and read these like, you done it before, you can do it again. Come on, Johnny, you can do it. There's a handful that I do that with, but for the most part, I don't want to read it after it's published.
That's interesting too. Like, and I picked up on like what you're talking about that. Like I said, I kind of have suffered from it too. And, when those comments do come, I read them and I'm like, well, you had a point there. Maybe I should make a positive change, but go ahead.
What I was going to say, when it comes to comments, this is my advice on that. It's going to sound kind of harsh too, but I'm getting older and I'm turning into a curmudgeon. So I don't really care what most other people think. There are a handful. There's more than a handful. There are people that I do greatly value their opinion. And if I'm getting thumbs up from them, then I'm doing things right. Of course you want, as a writer, I want my work to influence the general public. I want to inform them and I want to influence them. But I also realize that there's going to be some that I'm never going to do that to. And I also realize there's going to be some that's going to really react negatively to what I put out there. I'm to the point now that it used to bother me, but my skin has gotten quite a bit thicker and I don't really care. There are some people that I do care. And if they were to approach me with criticism, and say, hey man, you missed the mark here big time, I sure did. Or I would for sure be back there examining what I did, to see where I missed it and ask them to explain it to me. But, generally speaking, man, that just doesn't bother me anymore. I don't really care. I got more important things. I got the next piece I got to worry about. So that would be my advice on that. And your comments. You're just gonna have negative people, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it doesn't matter how well you craft your message. There's gonna be somebody that's gonna, almost invariably, there's gonna be somebody that's gonna find something to, Man, I wrote a shoe review the other day, and somebody found he nitpicked it twice. I mean, it was ridiculous, and it was a shoe review. But for wading shoes, I write for a couple of fly fishing magazines, and I do reviews every now and then, gear reviews. But anyway, that's just part of it. When you put content out there, everybody's got a voice now. Everybody thinks their voice is relevant, and they're going to talk about it. So
yeah, man. One more question about your writing before I got a couple questions about just the nonprofits that you serve on that you mentioned. But do you have a strategy? Like every morning, Johnny wakes up, he drinks a coffee, and he does his writing for projects from 5:30 to 7, and he does 1,000 words no matter what. Like, do you have any sort of process, or is it just free flowing? You just do it every day?
It's pretty free flowing, and that's probably not good. But I've tried to work on a tight schedule and say I'm going to sit down and write at this time. I think some writer, I can't remember if it was Stephen King or Ernest Hemingway, somebody said you can't wait on inspiration. You got to go out and get it with club. So I've tried that. I've tried to sit down and force myself. And it depends. If I have to transcribe an interview, then I will get started on that usually in the mornings. After I get up, I have, and I'm like you, I said, I get up early, have coffee, usually go for a walk. Like this morning, we got blackberries out here on the dirt road, and I went out to pick some blackberries. Try to do something outside in the early mornings when the weather permits. Come back in, usually check my emails, any messages I need to respond to. And then if I got a transcribed interview, then I'll go ahead and do that in the mornings. And usually on a story that involves interviews, those interviews are the inspiration for the story. I can build an entire narrative based on those interviews. That's my scaffolding. And other stories, essays, the more creative work, I'm horrible at that in the morning. My best creative work usually happens, and I hate this because I'm an early bird, but it usually happens late at night, in the late afternoon, in the evening. I don't like it because I want to start winding down there and getting ready for bed. I go to bed early, but very often I'll get in a groove at 8:30 at night, and I got to ride it out until it's done. So probably the better essays, the more creative work done on any other stories I've done, pieces, they generally happen in the afternoon or evening. I do try to set aside time. I try to block out time in the afternoon. Again, not necessarily to say I'm going to write X amount of words, but I'm going to be on this project. And that may result in 300 words. It may result in 1,000 words. I'm not really sure. I will say the hardest part of writing, though, is getting those first words down. That's one reason I do like doing interviews. I don't like transcribing, but when I get those interviews transcribed, I already have the words down I can build on. But when you're starting from scratch, the hardest part is getting those words down. I will say that if you're wanting to be a writer or young writers, you got to get the words down. You got to get those first words down, even if it is like, breaking water uphill. You got to get the words out, and then you can build on them. You got something to work with. And inevitably, I will, struggle. I'll block off some time and turn off my phone, block off some time, get the words down, and I'll look at them like, man, every one of them suck. I'll come back the next day, and I'll look at them as like, they all suck, but there's a thread here I can follow. And I'll take this little bit of good and build on it. And then it usually takes off then. It's like priming a pump. Once you get those words down, you go back again, you find something to go off of, and you get it primed, and that's when the flow starts. And I don't know how to describe the flow. I've heard other people try to talk about it. When you get in that zone, though, I don't know. I played basketball. I never was very good at it, but I was a very streaky shooter. But I knew there were times that I would get in this spot where it didn't matter where I was on the court. You tell me the ball, I'm going to hit it. And the analogy is very similar to the writing. You're a shooter in archery. I shoot archery. You shoot tournaments. And there were times that the bullseye looked big as a freaking, big as basketball. And I could hit it with my eyes closed. And that's how it feels when you get in the zone with the writing. Hard to get there sometimes, but the words flow. But generally, again, I don't have a hard and fast schedule because I don't know what the day's going to throw at me. I don't know what emails we're going to require. I don't know how much work I'm going to have to do to get this subject ready for this story and get this writer hooked up with this person. I don't know, how long an interview is going to take. I have all these variables that I don't know, so it's hard for me to set a schedule. But if on good days, I will block out time in the afternoon and say, all I'm doing is writing, or all I'm going to do is work on this project. And if a lot of words get down, great. If a few words get down, that's okay too.
You ever set time aside that's like, yeah, well, Johnny's been working a lot this week. He's going to chill for 2 hours and not do anything at all? Or do you have like mechanisms for that?
I absolutely do. Again, though, a lot of my personal and, a lot of my passions are so tied to what I do. But I actually will, I have a to-do list I write out every week. And that makes me feel like I'm doing something even when I think I'm not getting anything accomplished. I can look and say, yep, you did this, this, and this. I will actually write in there time, I'm going to go to the creek and I'm going to fish. this morning I will block that out. I'm going to go fish for 3 hours this morning. During deer season, we live on venison, and so I bow hunt. And when I look ahead at the weather and I see it's going to be really, really good day to be in a tree stand, I block it out on my calendar. And I used to feel really self-conscious about that and feel guilty actually sometimes, but I don't anymore. It's really important. It's not only important for me professionally, because there are actually a lot of great ideas come, when you're out. That's usually when inspiration hits. Mm-hmm. I'll be out in the middle, knee deep in the creek, and all these great words are coming to me then. Of course, I got nothing to write them down on then, but that's when ideas come to you. So it's important for that, but it's also important, just for me, again, it took me 49 years old. It took me a long time to realize that. I'd always feel a tinge of guilt when I would go off and do these things, but now these are the important things, this and time with your family. And I got 2 grandkids and one on the way. These are things you must make time for. And that includes for me, time in the woods, time in the creek, time, like you said, just doing nothing. There are times I'll just go sit out under this big cherry tree in the yard and not do anything, just decompress. So I make time for that. Those are the things that definitely get on my schedule. And I think they're important. And again, speaking from someone who's in a very privileged position, I've not always been able to do that. And I realize that a lot of people can't do that. But that was actually part of me building this life, is that I wanted that kind of control. I'm a huge control freak, actually. That's the deal. I don't want anybody else to tell me what to do or how to do it or when to do it. I don't mind working hard, but I want to do it on my own terms.
Yeah. My wife the other day, just like, she was halfway joking. She's like, "You have a serious problem with authority." I was like, "You say this like it's a bad thing."
Yeah, I do. I had a friend I was framing houses with when I first started back to school, when I was 40 years old. And we were building houses, not just framing them. And man, he's an excellent carpenter and can build a house from the ground up. I had no beans about it. We were out there one day putting a metal roof on a house, and it was like 110 degrees. And I said, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life." And he turned around and looked at me and he said, "Yeah, but you're getting paid for it." And I said, "Yeah, but it's stupid." And a little later on, he was quiet for a long time. And he said, "You just don't make a very good hand, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." I don't want to work for anybody. I said, "I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, but I love you, but no, I don't make a good hand. And no, I don't want to be here working for you right now." And he said, "Well, you told me, so that's fine. Let's just get her done." So we got it done. But yeah, I don't like authority. I don't like somebody telling me what to do. I don't react well to that. I'm better at it now. I let stuff roll off. But when I used to really bristle up at that.
Yeah. Man, it's, like working at the college, I've experienced that a little bit, but also too, like, I wouldn't say that where I'm at's an example, but I do hear and read about these incredible teams of people that have this awesome culture where it's like, hey, your boss doesn't seem so much like a boss. I just haven't personally experienced that.
No, I haven't either. And again, though, most of my life, man, again, from the time that Christine and I have been married, I've almost always worked for myself. I've found some way to do it. It's just something that it was having control of my time, I think, was something that was probably more important than even having someone just tell me what to do. Is having control over my time was very important to me.
Yeah.
And again, that, a lot of times that meant long hours. It wasn't the work. It wasn't that. It was that some sense of being in charge of yourself, I guess.
Yeah.
That's just as appealing. That's just as appealing, just as an appealing aspect of this job I do now as anything else. It's, why I'm not actively, and knock on wood, I've been fortunate and I have to, I'm not actively looking for, any kind of position within a publication or any kind of media group, an actual job. I want to try to stay freelance and try to find, but the downside of that is you don't know what your income is going to be from month to month. But the plus side, again, is that I have control of my time. So yeah. That's the trade-off.
Yeah. Right on, man. That's awesome. Super interesting approaches and background. Um, to the White River Waterkeeper, right? You
Oh,
told me briefly about that. I looked into it a little bit, just a Google search. I mean,
yeah.
how did you get involved with that, and what are you doing with that organization?
I was invited to be a board member just this year. Probably based. I know the Waterkeeper, which is the executive director of the organization, is Jessie Jean Green, and I've known Jessie for a while. I've interviewed her for some stories. I did a story about the hog farm up on the tributary of the Buffalo River, and interviewed Jessie for that. And people in the conservation circles, environmental circles knew me, and I was invited to join that board. And their goal is their focus is the White River watershed, which is north of the river valley. Actually, it's on the other side of the divide of the Boston Mountains, and it's everything that flows: Buffalo River, Richland Creek, Creek, all kinds of other little creeks up there, all run into the White River. So it's all that watershed. And we kind of keep our eyes on Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, make sure regulations are where they need to be. Jessie, our executive director, used to work for Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, so she knows the ins and outs. We keep up on policy decisions at that agency. That's mostly what we do. Try to inform the public of what's going on with the waterways. The Buffalo is the iconic Ozark Mountain stream and kind of iconic Arkansas stream. And so that river is almost like if we bring attention to all waterways in Arkansas, but the Buffalo is like our symbol of that, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word. But that's what we do. Mostly what I do, I'm a new board member. I'm following everyone else's lead right now. But it's an organization that is their purpose is to make sure that we have swimmable, fishable, drinkable water for everyone to enjoy. That's the goal, which really seems like something silly that we have to fight for, but that's where we are.
I talked to my friend who's a game warden about this, but what are your thoughts on them? And not to like probe you into some controversial, but what are your thoughts on them?
I'm all about controversy. So,
all right. He told me the number of people he saw down there when they made the decision to close the Buffalo River due to the pandemic. It kind of made sense to me. He said at one point there were like 400 people in really close proximity to people, and I was like, "Damn!"
Yep.
Right? But what are your thoughts on that? Like everybody's like, "They're closing outside." Oh my God,
They're not closing outside. They're closing a state park. And there are tons of places to go in Arkansas besides the state parks. Those are the most easily accessible, and I get that. And I understand that not everyone, again, comes from my position, that I know where a lot of swimming holes are and trails and places that nobody goes, and that's where I go. And I don't want to tell anybody else about it because I don't want anybody else there. So they're not closing that. They're closing the parks. They're not closing the outside. They're closing the parks, and I get it. Personally, this is going to be really controversial, probably more controversial than you thought any of this was going to be. I think they ought to even limit access to the parks even more than they do during times like this.
I thought about that. I mean, they're busy all the time.
Yeah, it ruins the experience. And I'm not sure how to address that. I'm not calling for a blanket, we can only allow half the people we've been allowing. I'm saying that we need to, we're loving a lot of these places to death. And here you're going to get me started on GPS coordinates and all kinds of other stuff, Instagram and all this other junk, telling people where all these places are. And that's, again, I understand that everyone wants to experience the beauty, but when you start bringing all these hordes of people out there, it ruins the beauty. It ruins the experience. So that's one of the challenges going forward, I think, with not just, it's been highlighted during the pandemic because people are seeking, other outlets. They can't go to movies. We can't do this, can't do that. We can still go outside. So let's go to parks. But it highlights some things that need to be addressed. You know, as the population grows, we have finite right now. You know, we only have so many parks. We only have so many access areas. Is it better to build more parks and create more access areas? Well, then you start ruining some of these places that are, you know, they're not pristine, of course, but they're much wilder and more enjoyable for people like me. You know, the more roads and the easier access, those are things that I'm not a fan of, but I'm willing to go the extra mile. I'm willing to walk. I'm willing to do all those other things to enjoy these other areas that are closer to being unspoiled. So it opens up a big old, you know, again, that's something we're going to have to think about environmentally as we go forward.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a clear-cut answer on that.
No, that it brings up a lot of interesting points to think about. Is like, well, was there a problem we're just seeing highlighted because of the pandemic? I'm with you on that 100%. Because I mean, I've floated the Buffalo several times. It's great. I've done the wilderness portion that I had to cross the White River when I got there, you know? So, and I love it, man. And I loved being on the wilderness portion and not seeing a soul for 3 days. That was great. That was great.
Yeah. That's what, again, I seek those places out, the places I fish and where we camp and where I go to hunt and hike. I don't broadcast it, and I stay away from, we haven't been to Buffalo in a while because it's so crowded. You know, I find little creeks off the beaten path.
Yeah.
Some of them barely have names or names that not anybody recognizes. Those are where I'm going. And so, again, I understand that most people, I'm very privileged. My dad's from Newton County. My mom grew up in Hector, and, you know, these were my birth rights, but I had this knowledge from my earliest memories of where these places were and how to get to them. And not everyone was given that. So I understand. Going forward, again, I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's something that we're going to have to talk about. Again, that's a good segue into the other nonprofit I'm in. You're going to talk about
conservation.
Yeah, conservation hawks. These are other issues. I mean, it's pretty clear cut what we need to do in this situation. But it's just trying to battle the political winds blowing the other direction. Conservation Hawks is a group founded by Todd Tanner. It's based roughly in Montana. That's where Todd lives. I think I'm the southernmost board member. And we are a group that we're trying to bring, not only, it seems like we should be past the point of explaining climate change, climate change and the dangers to people, but we're still trying to do that with hunters and anglers, and also trying to get them to be politically active in this debate, or it's not a debate, into this discussion about what we need to be doing. And hunters and anglers actually should, maybe besides the only other people I could think of that might be more affected would be people that their livelihoods are affected, like agriculture and seafood and stuff like that. But hunters and anglers as a group are pretty closely intertwined with the land, and are usually the first people that notice changes, notice things shifting. I've noticed it here in Arkansas, and we haven't been nearly as affected as other areas of the nation. But our goal as an organization is to create awareness, and again, hopefully what we want to do is bring hunters and anglers into this discussion, and have them, pretty bluntly, have them get on their politicians to get something done about it. I'm not one to argue with the science on here. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to argue with the scientist. This is what's going on. This is why it's going on. Our task is, how can we mitigate this? How can we alter this a little bit so the future is not quite so bleak? Beyond even the existential threat, or before the existential threat, how do we mitigate this so that my grandkids can go to the creek and catch smallmouth bass? And how do we mitigate this so that, they can sit out on a summer evening and listen to the cicadas and the whippoorwills? Because all of these things are being affected by climate change. There's even duck hunting in Arkansas is being affected by climate change. I'm not a duck hunter, but there's an effect. All of these, again, the kind of the heart and soul of hunting and angling is the land and the waters, and they're all being affected. So again, that's our goal. We're seeing some progress, I think. We saw some progress last year when we all got smacked in the mouth when the Arkansas River flooded out of its banks, and people were starting to know, hey, something's changing here, in a historic flood. We saw some shifts there, and we see a few here and there, but it still seems like an uphill battle.
Yeah, like most things seem to be right now, honestly. Like every little thing is a politicized issue right now.
Yeah, I'm still puzzled as to how science can become so politicized, but I guess it always has been. Seems like it's more so now, but yeah, everything seems to be like that.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been a super interesting talk, Johnny. I really, you're into a lot of awesome stuff, and you're passionate about it, and thoughtful and insightful too. Like, I like that you took a minute to like that. A really good friend of mine and a mentor, like I'll ask him complicated shit all the time, and he always like pauses before or not always, but he'd be like, yeah, I'm going to need to think this out for, okay. And then and it's like, it leaves you on a cliffhanger, but man, it's, so many times I'm taken note of that and tried to use that. Like one of my speech teachers called it working the pause. It gives you time to think, organize your speech. So, but man,
you build drama too.
Yeah, you were really drawing me in, man. And it's you're passionate about what you're into, and it's great talking to you. Last question.
Sure.
I've been doing this with all my guests. I've read 52 books or listened to 52 books, read some this year. If you had, whether it's your passions or just something that was influential to you, what book recommendation could you give to our
Just
listeners? One, half a dozen? I'm definitely going to read whatever top number one when you say first. So
okay. The first one is, you're going to think it's just a hunting book, but it's not. It's called Heart's Blood and is written by David Peterson.
Okay.
And when people ask me, because I'm a different person than I was in my 30s, when people ask me what happened, I point to this book. It changed my life. And I've actually I wrote an email to David Peterson, the author, and told him, I don't know if he grasped the enormity of what I was saying. It's why I'm a writer. He introduced me to so many other writers in his book, so many other concepts. And I'll tell you, I've read the book totally through 6 times. The first 3 times, it pissed me off. It absolutely challenged some very deep-seated ideas in me that it made me angry. And but I read it anyway. Read through it again the first 3 times. I remember I'd get to these certain parts. I'd get mad when I was getting that chapter. Man, I'm getting mad again. This guy's wrong. But I read through it, and man, I line up almost across on anything you want to talk about, probably with David Peterson now, the writer. Again, that book introduced me to other people that I wasn't aware of at the time. Aldo Leopold, Edward Abbey, Paul Shepard, Wendell Berry, all these other great thinkers and writers that I didn't know about. I was 35 when I read it. And I picked it up at Barnes & Noble in Northwest Arkansas because I was just wanting a hunting book and had no idea that it was going to transform. In my bookcase right now, it's the first one on the top row. I mean, everything else falls behind it. We got 3 bookcases. This is the lead bookcase. But anyway, that's the number 1 book. And you don't have to be a hunter to appreciate it. Now, it's written from the perspective of a hunter, but it is way deeper than going out killing elk or deer. Let's see. Whew. Another one, Edward Abbey. Lord, you could read any of his books. Desert Solitaire. It's probably a great book of essays. Abbey is, he's right next to David Peterson in my mind. Actually, he's probably,
hey, a friend of mine just recommended this book, a sociologist, Jesse Weiss. Do you know him?
I think I know the name. I don't know the person.
He worked at U of O forever, and he just moved to Nebraska. But this is on my list, the one you just, Desert Solitaire. He just suggested that to me. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Aldo Leopold, Sain County Almanac. Man, I could go through a whole. Paul Shepard. If you want to understand humanity, Paul Shepard, Coming Home to the Pleistocene. This went hand in hand with what I was learning in anthropology when I started reading this book. Basically we're only 10,000 years into, after the Neolithic Revolution, we started farming. The prior millions of years, we were hunter-gatherers. That's still who we are in so many ways. And so much, I think, of our issues and our problems in society are because we have forgotten. I'm not at all. A lot of people, I say this, like, oh, you want us to go back to live in a cave? No, that's not what I'm saying. We've forgotten who we are and how we are intertwined into the environment that we live in. We've separated ourselves. We've made this really big abstract world, and we've completely forgotten about the real world for the most part. So if we go back to visit on vacation or for fun or something like that, but we've forgotten that we are flesh and blood part of this world. Paul Shepard, in a very poetic way, explains all of this. He's a brilliant writer. Really rich stuff, though. Those are, is that 4? And I could go on all day, but I'll give you a novel to wrap up with. And it's written by a guy from the Ozarks. He's in Missouri.
Brooks Blevins?
Nope. Daniel Woodrell, or okay. Woodrell. He wrote one book that became a movie, Winter's Bone.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, the movie's okay. The book's really good. And I haven't read all these books, but I read most of them. But my favorite book, and I kid you not, I read this book in one day. It's called Woe to Live On. And it is about these, it's post-Civil War in the Ozarks. And it's about a group of men. I don't really want to tell you anymore. It's just, I can relate to it. I can't relate to the characters so much, but I can relate to the writer because he comes from a similar, he's from the Ozarks in Missouri. But yeah. The story is so compelling and so fast. I remember I got up in the morning, it's a Saturday morning, and I got the book like the day before. And I thought, well, I'm going to sit here and drink my coffee and I'm going to read a chapter. I got halfway through the chapter and I was like, nope, I'm going to read this damn thing today. I don't care if it takes me all day. I didn't do anything else. I read the book.
All right.
In one day.
It's on Audible, so I've got it on my list now. So
it was fantastic. And I would recommend any of Woodrell stuff, and especially if you're from this area, the way he writes and the way he speaks, and a lot of his perspective comes from the same place you got your perspective. It's I can relate so much with what he's writing, or how he's saying it, I guess. Mm-hmm. Those would be my recommendations off the top of my head. Like I said, I got a whole list of others I could go on for days about books. But
well, yeah, awesome, Johnny. Well, thanks, man, and hopefully this won't be our last conversation. I was looking forward to talking to you, and it's been great, man. I really appreciate you sitting down and taking the time.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. I really did.
All right. Well, when I get this edited, I will shoot you over a link if you want to give it a share. And again, hopefully we'll talk to you again on down the road.
Sounds good, man.
All right, man. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Brian.
See you.